Welcome back to Extraordinary Drummer Show. As you know, I'm your host, Sharon Moore. I always say today, today, today. I'm excited today. The gentleman I have on today, he's a drummer's drummer. They've called him the brush man, brush master. He's a teacher. He's a clinician. He's an educator. And I'm glad to say he's my friend. His credits reach like the who's who, from Sammy Davis to Tony Bennett, George Sheeran. We're going to talk about a little bit, Joe Pass, Joe Williams, and so many more. Will you help me welcome my guest today on the Extraordinary Drummer Show, Clayton Cameron. Welcome to the Extraordinary Drummer Show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really glad you're here. How you been doing?
Yeah, listen, I can't complain. Healthy and able to play and have a good time still. So I can't complain.
I want to do one of your credits, and then we'll get to some of the other greats a little later on in the show. Let's go right to Mr. Sammy Davis Jr. himself. What was his name that they called him? They called him something else. You remember?
Well, as his touring musicians, we used to call him Mr. D. We never called him Sammy. In fact, he never called me by my name. When I got the gig, my first gig was at the Minnesota Fairgrounds, and I hadn't met Sammy. I hadn't really met the band yet or anything. I mean, during the audition, you kind of meet people, but you don't really connect. But so anyways, we did a show. He shows up for the first number on stage, and I had to pinch myself because I was paying attention to him, and I'm still reading the music, So I was like, oh no, I gotta pay attention. And so the show went well, and then afterwards, we had an entourage of about 13 guys and one lady, Sammy's manager, and I'm green, mind you. I'm new to all this touring stuff. This is my first touring gig, and with the exception of Joe Williams, but that was a little smaller. And so anyway, we're at this restaurant, and Sammy, we're all having dinner, and he clicks the glass, and he says, he's about to make a toast, and he said, "Good show tonight, guys. Good show." And he said, "I want to welcome our new drummer, Big C." And so that's what he called me for the entire time. He never called me Clayton at all. My name was Big C all those years I toured with Sammy, and he was referred to affectionately as Mr. D.
Clayton, let's talk a little drum technique.
Yeah.
Brushes.
There's a TED Talk I did, which is basically a brief history of rhythm in America. It's called Clayton Cameron, Manhattan Beach. And then there's another one called Clayton Cameron, Arithmetic. So there's two TED Talks. But the first one, the Manhattan Beach one, is where I talk about the tap dancers and how they influenced me. And so Sammy and those guys, I watched them for 2 weeks, and I was just keeping time. I wasn't trading fours or anything. But, I would hear Sandman Sims do these slip and slide and rhythms, where they were all in a linear fashion. So, he didn't like do one thing, stop, and then do another thing. It would be like you would hear the slide, and then the tap, and the slide, and the tap, and I was like, oh man. So I would go back to my room, my hotel room that night, and take my pad, and I would try to, emulate that. So anyway, so I'll kind of show you if I can switch. I'll switch cameras real quick, if that's okay. So I just got my little pad here. You can see that, okay? Yeah. So so Sandman Sims, would do stuff. He'd be tapping, and so let's say like something like you do a paradiddle, right? So I figured the way that I would maybe incorporate these things is like do stuff I already know, and then try to sweep. So instead of a diddle, I created a rudiment called a tap sweep. So I would diddle, but the second diddle would be a sweep. So right, so it's like a double stroke roll. And Billy Higgins kind of got me into this because one day he asked me, Clayton, what do you have for perpetual motion? Because I was showing him something else. And he did like this. I was like, oh, that's perpetual motion, old school guys. So the tap sweep is meant to be done in that fashion. So you're just that perpetual motion. And then, of course, another thing with the paradiddle, I would sweep. So instead of a diddle, I do what I call a sliddle. Just sweep. So you go. Okay. So now you got Paris tap sweep. And again, I'm just trying to emulate the tap dancers, you know. Okay, and then there's a thing that drummers always would do, but it wasn't necessarily like a specific rhythm. It's usually like kind of like a long roll. So I took that and I call it a friddle, where you, instead of a diddle, you go. So you got two beats there too. So now you got a Paris tap sweep, Paris sliddle, Paris friddle. You dig? And then one more is the rim flex. And that was another thing. I saw Louis Bellson do this one time and doing a drum solo for like a few seconds. And that just tripped me out. So I went home and bloodied my hands trying to do it. And so I took that as well. So you take that. So every time I strike the rim, my hand is way below. It's kind of hard to tell at this angle, but my hand is way below the rim. So you can see the wire flexing. So what I would do, you let it flex, and you can control the flex, how many times it touches by how much you pronate. So I developed it so that, I can control it, just for 2 times. So every time I strike the rim, the brush is flexing twice. It's flexing more than that, but I'm taking it off so it doesn't touch anymore. Right? So you can do it 2 times, 3 times. Dug it up, dug it up, dug it up, dug it up. 4 times. One-iana. So I can control it up to that point. So same thing. So I would take that the rim flex, and so just like a paradiddle, you go. I do it on the rim. And then I would allow the flex to happen. So So in brief, that's kind of how those things developed.
Tell me about this one. The correct way of holding brushes, and then what is known by stirring the soup. You ever heard that expression?
Yeah, Ed Thigpen and I used to, get together, and we used to call it like tossing a salad. All kinds of food analogies. But yeah, stirring the pot, stirring the soup, tossing the salad. And it just all comes back down to, just really the groove on the snare drum with the brushes, is all that is. I mean, when Ed and I would get together at NAMM, so we might just be keeping some time, so you're just keeping time. And then you start trading fours and start doing all this stuff, So that would be like, tossing the salad or whatever, just keeping that good time, that sort of thing.
You originally from LA?
Yeah, born and raised in Los Angeles. They call it where I grew up, and my parents bought a home when I was around 6 years of age, Mid-City, LA. My mom still lives there to this day. So yeah, Mid-City, LA.
Clayton, let's talk endorsements. What are you doing? Sticks, drums, heads, cymbals, so forth?
All my endorsements, I've been with all of them for many, many years, starting with Zildjian. Zildjian was my first endorsement was Remo. Remo, years ago, right when I started with Sammy, I used to play their drums. They had these, there's some pictures around of me somewhere with these reflective, gold. I think Louis Bellson used to play them, so I got a kit. And so that was my first endorsement. I'm still with Remo to this day. And then, old man Zildjian one year saw me in the booth. Someone, whipped out some brushes, and he happened to be there, and he just freaked out over me playing brushes. And he literally said, he says, "Oh my God, we can have brush clinics." And so he basically signed this guy up. And so that's how I got my Zildjian endorsement from the man himself, for many, many years, Zildjian. And then Ludwig, I was always an admirer of their snare drums, and so Catalano, who was the artist rep at the time, we talked for many years before I became an artist. But once I moved to New York, I decided to, not really tie myself to any particular drum endorsement. And then I started touring with Tony and John Catalano, and I hooked up again, and I started playing Ludwig drums back in '92. So I've been with them since '92. And then in 1990, I was doing a PAS concert, and it was the first clinic I ever did for PAS. And my video, The Living Art of Brushes, had just come out. And when I say come out, I mean that I took out classified ads in every magazine. There was no cell phones and internet and all that. So I took out classified ads in Modern Drummer. That was seen by another magazine in Europe called Slaughterkrant. And so then I ended up having a distribution deal with Slaughterkrant, which was IMP in Europe, for my video called The Living Art of Brushes. I had it here in all of the major drum shops in the United States. And then I also signed on a tour with Joe Williams. I went by Yamaha and showed them the video, and then they became a distributor in Japan. And so, the rest is kind of history. So I'm doing this clinic, and I had already set up all these things. And so the video is selling, and people are starting to, get a little knowledge of brushes from me. And so I was doing a clinic, and Carol Collado came up to me after I was asked a question, "What brushes do you play?" And I said, "Well, I play these Taiwanese brushes that I buy, that I order through the mail. The only problem is they fall apart after, so I would buy them in bulk, and so they would fall apart, but they felt good while they were, in order." And so Carol Collado said to me that year, that was 1990, she said, "Clayton, just tell us what you want, and we will make it." So, to this day, here they are, the Clayton Cameron brush from Collado. And I'll show you a little bit what it's about real quick. So these brushes, so what I did was I told her, I said, well, I had done some sessions where I wanted to be able to, I wanted to be able to turn them over in case I had to do a fill, like I was doing this Billy Childs record, and the tune was called Jazzmania, and so it had like this really nice, it was my version of a Perdi. So it goes on and like that. But then Billy, my childhood friend, Billy, who we lived around the corner from each other as kids, he puts this fill in there, and it just doesn't sound good with the wire. So I had to play the back end of with this, And so I told Carol Collado, I said, "Look, I need to have the back end of it be, hard like a stick. So if I'm in that situation again, I can just flip it over and get the sticks down." But then, drummers like to play, do little zings on the cymbal. So what we did was put a little, it's basically a furniture, what do they call them? Button, and to scrape the cymbal. So it's not exactly the same tone, but you can still do it. And so this can be played as a stick, and also use it as a cross stick. So if I'm going to change cameras real quick again. So so you can, this can hit the rim. And so another thing, so so either I can flip it over, do that sort of thing. That sort of thing. So that was the Clayton Cameron brush. So she, Carol did what she said. She said, "We'll make whatever you want," and so, we have a good relationship since 1990.
We have a thing on the show that we call Word of Advice, where I asked the drummers, I asked the guests if they would leave a parting word of advice for the up and coming drummers, even the guys at the next level, but that are trying to get traction in this game. Would you leave them a word of advice?
Yeah, I've had the same advice for everyone for years, and that is, love what you are doing. Because it's always going to be the ups and downs, the ebbs and the flows. But as long as you maintain that passion and that love for what you're doing, then you should be all right. And that means you have to be patient. And I believe the Greek definition, the origin of the word patience is to suffer. And so sometimes just being patient means that maybe it's not your day to day, but it could be your day tomorrow, so you got to just hang in there. Might be a little suffering, so you just got to, wade through all of that and just continue to love what you're doing. And, with that way you always, be willing to, keep going.
Thank you, Clayton. Do you also play piano? I see that piano next to you there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think I can get you to play a couple of bars for us?
Sure. I was just working on this tune. Shuli Bop?
No.
Yeah. So there's a tune that Roy Haynes plays on. Roy Haynes plays on with Sarah Vaughan. And it's called a Shuli Bop. It goes a Shuli Bop, Shuli Bop, Shuli Bop. So I was just working on the changes. So it's like a Shuli Bop, Shuli Bop, Shuli Bop. So it's just some nice changes. So I was just working on that for my UCLA class. But yeah, that was one thing. That's another word of advice. If for us drummers, know much about the music as you can as well. Because that's really important when you understand what's happening. Because if you don't. Anyway, so know as much about music as you can. As you know, I teach at UCLA, so I have a class, combo class where you teach people how to improvise and all of that. But I also have a class in a book that I'm working on called Perfect Time, And perfect time is kind of like, it sounds like one thing, but really the title comes from the 10th century when music notation was being developed by this cat named Guido d'Arezzo. He was a French guy, lived in Italy, a monk, and so being a monk, he was pious, and so anything that was in three, like 3/8, 3/2, 3/4, he called it perfect, and because it represented the Trinity, because it was three. Now, for me, I've been saying all along, throughout my learning in music, is that there's something very special about groups of threes because it's such an integral part of what we do in music. So many parts of music. And so the book is called Perfect Time because of those groupings, three. Not that it's only about that, but once you get into that and you master those threes, as Steve Jordan says, one day we were having, it was me, him, and Ulysses. He said, "Yeah, man, you gotta have those threes. Gotta have those threes." So anyway, so the book is called Perfect Time, and hopefully it'll be out by the end of the year.
Awesome. Clayton, I'll ask you a question here. I usually ask the drummers, the guests at the end of the show. Clayton, what would you want your legacy to be said, to be told?
Legacy. I would hope that the idea of my body of work would, show what I can do. That's one thing. But then the other side is that, I enjoyed teaching as well, that I enjoyed sharing, what I learned. And plus, I learned so much when I teach. So I would say, just, musician and educator, and, love the music and love people. So, something about that simple.
They're gonna say a whole lot more than that. Trust me, 50 years from now, they're gonna still be going, but those brushes, I don't got it yet. Let me
Yeah,
say this.
but you know what? Again, it goes back to the love. The only reason, I really do what I do because I loved it. And I remember my brother said to me one time, who was 10 years younger than me, and he was living with me when he was 18, and I was touring. And years later, he would say, "Clayton," he said, I remember where you would be practicing, and I would go to bed, and then I'd wake up, and you would be practicing, and I just thought you got up earlier than me. And he says, "I realize now that you just didn't go to bed." But that was the love, like I could be working on something and, be a minute, and next thing you know, it's like 6 hours, and only because, the focus and the love. So, so that's, I think anyone is capable of great things as long as they love it and they dedicate the time to it.
And what a time I've had visiting with you here. Let me say thank you so very much for being on the Extraordinary Drummer Show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Will you help me wave goodbye to all the fans?
All right, everybody. Thank you.